Hey again, friends. It is week 6 by popular demand. We are working on Chicken Alfredo today. So I am flying solo. I have my tripod and my phone clipped in, and this was kind of the original use case that we had talked about. If people didn't have an extra set of hands, friend, family member, aide, to help with the recording, so you're gonna see what it looks like if we're trying this together. So I have all of my ingredients. So we have spices and oil and stuff. We have flour. Some of it's kind of poured into a container just so it's a little easier to measure by myself. We have some jarred garlic, and we've talked about this previously. The recipe calls for regular garlic cloves, and it's really your choice, whatever's easiest for you. I prefer the taste of fresh garlic, but again, since I'm doing this by myself today, I just want to help myself a little bit, and this is a way to do that. We have our dairy stuff here, so we have milk, butter, shredded cheese. We have our recipe at hand. I have a knife out and ready to go. We have our cutting board, since we're going to be trimming a little bit of turkey. And again, notice I have my my damp paper towel. So that's there, and it helps with the stability of the cutting board, so I feel nice and safe. On the stove, we have a preheated oven. We talked about this in the recipe a little bit, so that way it is waiting for you. You don't really have to wait for it to play catch up. In the recipe as well, I talk about preheating a pot of water. So this already came to a boil. If we take a look at the surface of the water, it's kind of shimmery. So if I turn this on high again, it will start boiling within a minute or two. So again, I don't have to wait for it. It waits for me and knows when I'm ready. I have a pot ready for assembling our Alfredo sauce. So that's good to go. I have our colander in the drain ready to go. So everything's kind of set up for me to be successful with this. So with a little bit of planning in advance, I was able to set everything out. I was able to check all the ingredients and know that it's nearby in case I need it. So I don't have to go running back and forth to the fridge or to the pantry or something else like that. I'm good to go. I feel ready, and let's try this together. So we're gonna take a look at the recipe again. I have it printed out. All the instructions are across the 2 different pages. If you have 2 separate pages, that's not a big deal. But the first instruction is preheat the oven to 425. We did that. Fill a pot with water, set it on the stovetop burner, and place it on high and place a lid on the pot. We did that, so that's kind of ready to go already. Add chicken breasts in a Ziploc bag or bowl and mix together with 2 tablespoons of oil and several shakes of salt and pepper. So part of that will be, when you buy chicken, you probably have to trim it a little bit so it looks a little nicer. You take some of the fat off, and we're gonna do that together. So let me set up my camera here to show you. So I'll tilt that down. You can see the cutting board. I'll get just a little bit closer. I have a bag with 1 chicken breast. We'll reuse this bag again, so once I'm done trimming this up, you can put it right back in the bag, reuse it, and add the oil and spices to this, and then that's ready to go. I have our knife. Again, I took this out before. It had been at my side as I carried it across the kitchen, so that way that was nice and safe. And what I'm aiming to do here is just to kind of trim it up, remove some of the fat, and take away some of the parts that look unappetizing. So that's some fat removed. Here's some fat on the top that you can kind of pull and cut off. There's some, fat on the top that we can see if we can't slice off just a little bit. I'm being picky, but know that you don't have to if you are uncomfortable with doing knife work. So having to cut things, slice things and stuff like that. There are usually some tricks to be able to get through this and not have to worry about that. So if you say, hey, this is good enough, it's good enough. You're the person who's in charge of this project, and know that you have the authority to make choices like that. So I'm just trimming up some of the stuff that's kind of clung together and sticking together on the bottom. Here's kind of another little line of fat that is along the edge of the chicken. So I'm just kind of pulling this. I apologize if you can't see it really well. But, you know, it's another little stringy bit that's easy to come off. So in looking at this closer, this looks good enough for me. I'm flipping it over again. Again, this isn't perfect. It absolutely doesn't have to be. But I'm just kind of like being a little picky. You don't have to be picky, so know that. I'm done with the knife. I'm not going to do any other cutting, so I'm going to leave it here on the cutting board. At the moment, I have one clean hand, one dirty hand. This is the knife hand, and it didn't come in contact with the chicken. This is the dirty hand that was touching the chicken as I was rotating it around, so I'm going to use my clean hand to hold the outside of the bag. So I flip the lip inside out, so that way we'll hold it that way. With my dirty hand, I'm picking up the chicken. I'm gonna put it at the bottom of the bag. So that's in there. I'm gonna wash my hands real quick. So, what are the next steps? Next steps after washing my hands, of course, are to add 2 tablespoons of oil. You can use vegetable oil or olive oil here, it doesn't really matter. And we're adding some salt and pepper. So you just want to kind of be able to coat the chicken. It's for flavor, but it's also to help it cook in the oven too. So it has more than one purpose. All right, I'm walking back over. I have my salt. I have a few different measuring spoons around. So I have a 1/4 teaspoon. I have a teaspoon. I think what I'm going to do is I'm just going to use the 1/4 teaspoons for stuff. So I'm going to add 1/4 teaspoon and just kind of throw it in there. And maybe what I'll do is I'll add 2. Now that I saw the first, I think I'd like a second. So there's that. I'm putting the lid back on our loose container of kosher salt. You have regular table salt, that's not a problem. I also have a pepper grinder. So this is what our kind of like store-bought pepper grinder, I think from Aldi, looks like. So there's a loose pepper on the inside. And if you smell it, it smells nice. So the outside of the bag is clean. So I'm gonna adjust this a little bit. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna stand this bag up and I'm just gonna start grinding some pepper on the inside. If you have regular kind of just countertop pepper, that is completely fine. This is what we have. So this is nice and convenient to use. Now that salt and pepper oil are in here, I'm gonna trim the bag inside out. So let me move this. So it had been with the lip kind of out. I'm kind of pinching it together and I'm pulling and it comes right out. So I'm gonna seal this. This is kind of the same thing that we would do with our marinated chicken. So if anything, this recipe is a good idea because it uses a lot of different skills. So I'm just mushing it up in there. My goal is to mix some of the oil, some of the salt, some of the pepper. It doesn't have to look exact, it doesn't have to look perfect. I just kind of want it good enough. And I think that's good enough. So I'm gonna open this up. That's open. I'm gonna bring it over to where our cookie sheet is and move our penne pasta and our whisk out of the way. Here's the cookie sheet. And what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna use the bag to kind of help me position the chicken. So I poured the chicken out, the bag is still on top, and what I'm gonna do is use the exterior of the bag to kind of get this in the middle. And I want that kind of top side or the skin side up. So this is kind of perfect. This turned out well. I'm just gonna walk the Ziploc to the other side of the room and throw it away in our big trash bag because it's a big bag. Let's take a closer look. So again, we were trying to look for kind of some good covering of salt and pepper and oil. It's shiny, so we can tell that the oil is there. It's salty, you can kind of tell by the texture. And there's like a good amount of pepper, like you can see that. So I think that's good enough. So next up on the recipe, I believe, is putting this in the oven. So place chicken on cookie sheet, done. Once the ovens come to temperature, place in oven for approximately 25 minutes. Okay. Once completed, place on plate, cover with aluminum foil and set aside. We'll worry about that later. Right now, place it in an oven and set a timer. So here is our oven again. Like we've been talking about, we need to kind of grab the oven handle and then step back a little bit, leaning back to allow all that air to come out. We're gonna do that here. Because our cookie sheet isn't hot, we don't have to worry about a pot holder, a glove, a no glove, anything like that right now. So let's just worry about putting the chicken in. All right, so this is ready. It's a temperature. Let me pick up the cookie sheet. Placing that in the middle, that looks good. Closing that, done. Now let's set the timer. Okay, cook time. We want 25 minutes, 2500. Oh, something happened. Okay, I don't know what that is. So cook time is something different. Let me try timer. So timer 2500 start. Okay, and it started to count down, so I know that that was the correct one. If I weren't using my phone, I could use a timer on my phone, but I'm recording with that. So what are some other things that we can use? If you have a watch with a stopwatch, you can do that. We also have a timer on our oven, so I could have used that too, but for the moment, I think that's good enough. When we cook the pasta, I'll probably need a second timer, and the other timer will come into play for that, but one thing at a time. So I'm looking at our recipe again. We took care of the chicken. It's on the cookie sheet and it's in the oven for approximately 25 minutes or done. We'll check the temp and we have a new thermometer, so we can experiment with that. Next block is once the water comes to a boil, add a box of penne pasta. So like I was saying, this is kind of like preheated, quote unquote. So this is the correct burner. It shows an illustration of where on the stovetop it is. It has 2 rings, which means both rings down here can go on high. And I bet this will start boiling in about 2 or 3 minutes or less. So while we're waiting, let's look for some other points on the recipe. So we're gonna start the water, get it to a boil, add a box of penne pasta, stir, and you stir to make sure that the pasta doesn't stick to the bottom of the pot. You don't have to stir constantly, but I always stir when I first pour it in and kind of get it mixed up. And then I might come back every 3 to 5 minutes. We're only cooking for about like, how many minutes? 10 to 12. So you only really need to stir it maybe 3, at the very most 4 times. No big deal. So once we get to the end of the time, we're gonna fish out a noodle. And what do you use? You use a slotted spoon. So let's take a look at our drawer together. We have a bunch of different, we have tongs, we have a couple of spoons and a ladle. I don't see a slotted spoon here, so it might be in our dishwasher, but we do have a regular spoon. So we can just carefully scoop out a noodle. We can try the one noodle. We want it to kind of be able to cut through with our teeth and feel like it's pretty well cooked. And I think we have a good idea of what that means. So add the pasta, stir, set a timer for 10 to 12 minutes. Fish out a cooked noodle with the slotted spoon and check to see if it's cooked through. So we'll do that. Once cooked, drain pasta in sink and leave it for the moment. Okay, so we're gonna drain the pasta, we're gonna leave it in the sink and set it aside, and it will be there when we're ready for it. Did you hear what I hear? This is making a bunch of noise. So let's look inside the pot. That is bubbly, we can hear the pot move. So this is ready to take off. Can you hear steam? Okay. So I have a dish towel. I'm just gonna pick this up, lift it, and I'm lifting it away from me so the steam doesn't get me. That is a nice rip-roaring boil, so that's good to go. And I'm gonna put this on our drain over here. Okay, so that's set. Again, this is at a boil. So I'm gonna set the phone down with the camera and we can pour this in together. All right, so here is that. This is a box of penne pasta. It is 16 ounces, and usually they're sold in 16-ounce sizes. So I opened that up. I got the same spoon as before. And now I'm gonna carefully pour it in. Let's bring this closer. So as it's coming in the pot, I'm stirring it. Again, like I mentioned, I wanna make sure that now that's sticking to the bottom, and I feel it trying to stick. It's kind of interesting. I'm gonna turn on the light here. So that way we can see a little bit better. Let's take a look together. So here's our pasta. Like I mentioned, I don't want it to stick. I think that's good enough. Okay, and I'm just gonna rest my spoon there on the handle. It's not near the burner. It's hard plastic, so I think it's safe and we can continue. So we need to set a timer, and here's where the second timer comes in. Okay, so we have this timer on the microwave. We have this timer on the stovetop that we need to work with. So let's try it. So let's try timer on, and let's go for 11 minutes. So 11's in between 10 and 12. So we're gonna come back in a couple of minutes and stir this again. Again, our goal isn't to like do anything fancy. We just don't want pasta stuck to the bottom because then it'll be harder to get out later. So that's done. Let's check our recipe. So once water comes to a boil, add pasta and stir. Set a timer for 10 to 12 minutes. Done, and we'll let that go. So the other things in the meantime are to work on our sauce. So mince both cloves of garlic. Again, I don't have cloves of garlic today. I have the jarred garlic. So it isn't perfect, but it certainly saves a little bit of time. It might on the side say what the equivalent is for a clove of garlic. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. So let's check together. Ready to use, refrigerate after opening. It doesn't, but it makes me think that if I match the size of a clove of garlic, which is kind of like about the size of like the end of my pinky, that about that size of material is probably about a half teaspoon, maybe a teaspoon. So I can scoop that and that shouldn't be an issue. So we're gonna add 2 teaspoons of garlic in that's already minced, so it's easier for us. And we're gonna add that to the pot with some other stuff. So one of the things I forgot is the cutting board, the knife, it's all chicken-fied. My fingers are clean and stuff. So I think what I'll do is I'm gonna pick this up carefully. I put all the pieces on top. I'm gonna pick it up from the corner that seems least dirty. It's tricky doing this as a selfie, but I'm gonna set this on the side of the sink. Why not in the sink? Well, what else is gonna be in the sink? Food that we're gonna eat. So we can't put that in the sink just yet. It's on the side. It's a nice big bright knife. I recognize, whoop, got on the counter. We'll clean that too. I recognize that now that I touched it, I need to wash my hand again. So let's do that. I'm gonna leave you with the boiling water and you can watch that for a second. So as I'm washing my hand, I realized that the soap is kind of near where the colander is, so I'm really trying my best not to splash too much. But again, what counts most is that I get my hands clean, not if we get some soap bubbles on the colander. So now that I did that, I'm just gonna rinse the colander off. I think that's probably an easy solution, just a little peace of mind to make sure that I didn't get any of that in. All right. So I checked the timer real quick up here. This is our chicken timer at 17.5 minutes. Whoa, I just checked this and the timer disappeared. I'm pretty certain that that went through, but if we're looking for now about 10 minutes, what's 10 minus 17? So if need be, I can come back here and look for this to be 7 minutes and that'll be correct. So I have a couple of systems here. Again, we're back at the boiling water and I'm gonna give this a stir now. So as I'm stirring, I feel it kind of very lightly touching the bottom. A couple were sticking and I'm realizing that that's probably a good idea that I do that. So again, a couple minutes left, a few minutes left. I'm checking the directions again. So let's see. Water, pasta, took care of that. Garlic. We're going to set a pan on the stove and turn the burner on medium. We're gonna get 2 tablespoons of butter and put it in the pan, allow it to melt. And once it bubbles, mix in the minced garlic and stir occasionally. Great. So next steps are put a pot on the oven. Okay, so again, here's what one of those 2 circles look like. There's a middle smaller circle and a bigger circle. So if we were using a big pot, a big pan, frying pan, we might use both, but I'm just gonna use the little one here because that's about the size of our pot. This is getting turned on medium. So again, there's 2 burners here. That is getting put on medium. So about halfway up the dial. That's good to go. We needed to measure butter. So let's take a look. All right, so here's our butter. This has on the side little lines showing teaspoons. So this is, what is this? Like a half stick of butter. You can buy them in different sizes, but almost all butter has some sort of a measurement. So if you're baking, they want to make it really easy. I'm going to get a knife, and I looked, and 2 tablespoons of butter is half this. But a trick in melting things is we want to break it up into littler pieces. So I'm just going to slice this up a little bit before we put it in the pan, the pot. All right, I'm going to carry this over. So let's see how many hands I can use with this. All right, so here is our pot. Medium heat. I'm going to use my knife to just kind of slide these out. So here's one, there's another one, and there's that. So that's now 2 tablespoons. I'm going to put the rest of that stick of butter in the fridge. So that way it doesn't get yucky. And we have our whisk over here. So we can now start using our whisk to stir things. So here's the butter melting, and that's doing a pretty good job. I was kind of concerned, curious whether or not that little ring would get things warm, and it did a pretty good job here. So I'm happy with that. The next steps that I recall are that we needed some minced garlic to go in, and I think once this is melted more, I'm gonna do that. So I'm gonna put my phone tripod down. I'm gonna adjust what it's showing. So again, here is the pot, here is the pasta over here. I'm gonna stir the pasta again. So that feels nice and loose. When I stir it, I can feel all the individual pieces of pasta, and they're all kind of floating good. Here's inside the pot again. So this looks basically all the way melted, so that's good to go. Next steps are garlic. So let's grab our jar of garlic. And I'm gonna, instead this time, I'm gonna eyeball putting the garlic in. I kind of have a teeny tiny spoon here, so I'm gonna try using this to measure. It's not a science. Since I'm doing this by myself, again, what I'm really paying attention to is how can I help myself with this? It's more important that I'm safe and that I'm trying my best with this. So if we look inside of the pot, I think we're in great shape here. I'm gonna try to adjust my camera a little bit more. This is tricky. I really appreciate everyone that's trying this at home by themselves, because this can be difficult to do. Okay, and again, hey, this is hot, all this is hot, that is a hot burner. Don't try to do too much of this unless you're very confident or you're used to this with your phone and a tripod. Again, we need to be safe here. This is just for you guys to see as an example. We don't want anyone getting hurt. So I hope you recognize that. All right, so this butter is kind of foamy looking. So it's got some like white kind of parts to the top of it. I am now going to take the jar off of the garlic, and I'm adding what I feel to be about a couple of teaspoons. As soon as I put it in, it immediately started sizzling. That's a great sign. Okay, that feels like a good amount. Jar goes back on the garlic, so that's gonna go in the fridge. And I'm gonna use my whisk to move the minced garlic around a little bit. It is sizzling nice. This smells awesome. So if we had smell-o-vision, you would recognize that we are cooking Italian pretty quickly. Okay. So this is moving a little faster than I expected, and because of that, I'm not sure what my next steps are. I'm gonna stir the pasta real quick as I'm trying to remember, and I don't remember. So you know what we're gonna do? I'm gonna take this off the burner. If I'm worried about what's happening and I'm not certain about the next step, I just took it off the burner, because you know what? That kind of pauses things for a second. We are not being professional chefs here. We are just cooking for ourselves and enjoying the process of cooking. So if I need to take a break, if I needed to move that off the burner because, oh, there it is. If I need to move that off the burner because I'm not entirely sure what my next step is, that's more than fine. That's not a big deal. So I'm going back here and checking the recipe. Mince both cloves of garlic, set pan on stove, turn burner on medium, butter in the pan. Once it begins to bubble, mix in the minced garlic and stir occasionally. Okay, there we are. I flipped over the page because now we're on page 2. As the garlic begins to smell good and lightly change color, we know that happened. Add about half the flour, approximately 1.5 tablespoons. Okay, so this is the next step for us. We need to get our flour. So this is our bag of flour. And Adam was nice enough to pour some in here for me. So what we can do is I might put some extra in here because we need to scrape flour. So who's heard of scraping flour? Usually bakers. So when we talk about spoons of stuff, this is a heaping spoon of flour. But when baking and usually with recipes, we can't really use that. We need to have an even or a scraped measure of flour. So when we do that, what we'll do is we'll kind of scrape a mountain of flour, and you can use your finger, or I prefer using the back of a knife. So here's the back of a knife, and just dragging that across the top. So now if you look, that is very, very, very accurate. That looks like a nice kind of accurate spoon of flour. So what do we do with that? Well, we need about 1.5 of these to mix in with our butter and garlic. So let me travel with this over to our stovetop. I'm gonna put that there next to the stove so I'm nice and prepared. I'm showing you the burner, and I'm gonna move the pot there in a second. I'm grabbing the flour. I'm grabbing the knife again. And again, since I don't have a 1/2 tablespoon measure, some of this is just doing it by eye and what feels right. The pot's going back on top. I smell cooked garlic again, and here's the spoon that we measured. So let me bring that closer. So that goes in. So that's one. And now I'm just gonna loosely kind of scoop some to what feels like about half. And to me, that feels like about half. That now goes in there, and according to the directions, I'm just gonna bring this closer to the stove for us. We need to mix this all into the butter. All right. So what I see is it's sizzling a little bit. It's on top of the heat. It's turning kind of like, almost like a butter cookie brown. It's not very dark, it's pretty light. Smells kind of floury. It's all mixed in. So I think our next step is to add the rest of the flour. So again, here is about 1/2 tablespoon that goes in. And now I'm going to do a sweep of a tablespoon. So I'm using the back of my knife and that spoon off camera. And here's that even spoon. So that goes in too. So I am going to use the whisk to stir this in more, and this needs to be well incorporated. So incorporated means all mixed together nice and evenly. And what we're actually making here is what's called a roux. So a roux is a base to different dishes. See, I'm now mixing this off of the stove because I felt it was getting a little too hot. So a roux is a mix of all different dishes, from gumbo to stews and French dishes. But cooking this will help make our sauce thicken, and that's the job of the flour here. So I'm looking at the bottom. The garlic is turning kind of a darker color, and what I'm going to do is, I'm uncomfortable with that, so I'm taking it off the burner. I'm not sure what to do next, but I don't want it to get like darker with the garlic, so I'm going to leave it alone for the moment. This is still going, and it now makes me curious whether or not that timer is good to go, because in stirring this and looking at the pasta, I noticed that this is like plumping up. They're getting bigger. They're soaking up some of that water. So I wonder what's going to happen if I hit the timer button. I wonder what that'll show me. Oh, so it showed me that the timer hasn't been going. This now says 6 minutes, so I think we might be over. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to fish out one noodle. So I did my best to fish that out. I'm gonna drop this in the colander. I'm gonna set my spoon aside, and now I'm gonna rinse the meal off. That's nice and wet, but I cooled it off. I can actually pick this up with my hand. And it feels like it's almost done. It's definitely cooking. It might have another minute, a minute and a half. So I'm glad that I checked. I'm glad that I noticed that. This is foaming up a little bit. So it makes me think that some of the starch is coming into play and stuff and things. So I'm stirring it again. I want to make sure that nothing is sticking to the bottom. And I kind of feel a little pressure that all these things are beginning to happen at once. So we're still working on our sauce. I'm checking the recipe, and it says after I mix everything together for the flour and the butter and the garlic, add the 2 cups of milk little by little into the pan, add approximately a couple of tablespoons at a time, and allow it to be mixed into the butter, garlic, and flour before adding any more. Okay. So we're wanting to make sure again that it's incorporated, that it's mixed together well, that everything's kind of blending. And I think that's okay to do. I just checked the chicken timer, and we have about 4.5 minutes left. I'm bringing this back over, and I'm gonna get my milk and bring this over too, so that way it's easily at hand. So here's my milk. I'm just gonna shake it because that feels like the right thing to do. I have a recipe close to where we're working. And here's our 1 cup measuring. So I am bringing this back, setting this in front of the burner. I have the measuring cup, I have the milk, and now I'm gonna move over the burner again. I'm gonna measure out a cup of milk now that that's on top of the burner, and I'm leaving the milk in there like the recipe said. I can't add it all at once. I have to add little by little and incorporate it or mix it in really well. So I want to see how this roux is doing. Seems like it's beginning to bubble up a little bit, so I'm going to add, okay, I added what feels like a couple of tablespoons. Got real foamy. Okay, so that is mixed in well. It all started like clinging together. That was kind of interesting, and I didn't expect it. I'm adding more, okay. So this is loosening up, so it's no longer feeling like a paste. And I'm gonna mix it in more, so that way it feels the same all through. I think there was some gloppy bits, some chunks. Okay, that feels good. So there is probably about the equivalent of like 3 tablespoons. Okay, so I'm stirring this more and more. Bubbling. Here's the rest of that 1st cup. All right. So this is mixing through good. Still loose. It feels incorporated. I'm pouring into the the measuring cup number 2 of milk. Again, we're adding little by little. We're not pouring the whole thing in.